We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding Suspendables, Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Saturday, guys. Congratulations. You made it through the week, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 grind. And now it is time to partake of the Saturday grab bag edition of this hobbyist podcast, which is called the American Radicals Podcast. I want to make sure we acknowledge everybody who's viewing us on rumble.com/amradpod and on YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, subscribe, follow, do all the things. You can also check us out at X America News on X/Twitter. And you can listen to the audio format of the show on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, and make sure you give us a 5-star rating and review there. We're trying to trick those algorithms into getting as many people to consume this content as possible so we can radicalize them into our commonsensical way of thinking on this program, which is, as I aforementioned, a hobbyist podcast, because I'm an American citizen exercising his First Amendment rights to share my beliefs and opinions and thoughts on news of the day that is content worthy and nothing that is classified, all open source, and definitely 100% not representing any particular arm, agency, department, or bureau of the federal government of the United States. Now, it is a Saturday grab bag, so hopefully everybody's off to a great start with their weekend. I actually got off to an early start on my weekend, as much as you can have a weekend when you're an indefinitely suspended forever FBI whistleblower. But the family decided to head on out to Orlando, which I'm loath to do generally, but it was a good decision by the wife. She said, hey, look, let's play a little bit of hooky. Kids aren't out of school yet, across the state, across the country. Let's try to sneak into SeaWorld, which is what we did. And I took both my boys, who are now 54 inches. The little one made it just by the skin of his teeth. Took them on some roller coasters yesterday. It was an awesome time. And they got pooped out after about 2 or 3 of them. So it was actually not too bad because we got home at a reasonable time. And it gave me an opportunity to get together and prepare for today's show on the Saturday Grab Bag edition of the AmRad Pod. So typically on a Saturday Grab Bag, we like to try to find those stories that might have slipped past your attention because the news cycle is going so fast. And we do have a collection of those. But in light of how we're heading into the latter third of the month of November, I think it's worth noting, because today's November 22nd, so just about 3 weeks into this month. We still have a week and change remaining. I want to make a bold statement, and I'm going to back it up. I think November 2025 might be the worst month, public relations-wise, in the history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So we're going to do an after action to start it off with. I teased it on Thursday, didn't really have time to get to it. We're going to spend a good, healthy portion of the show on that today. But other things that we want to talk about is a representative from Congress was just indicted. Chicago schools caught embezzling. New York is sending money to some far left organizations. Ukrainian corruption, shocker. And artificial intelligence is getting into the court system, and it's a worry for some judges out there who are looking into some deep fakes. So we're going to get to all of that, but we'll begin with the FBI stuff at the outset. But before we do anything, let's make sure we thank our underwriting affiliate of the day. And actually, today, that's going to be my good buddy's store, Garrett O'Boyle store, which is the-suspendables.com. The-suspendables.com, guys. That's the merch store. Garrett still has it functioning. Don't forget that hyphen between the and the suspendables. Otherwise, you go to a hockey website. Try to buy them out. All that merch. We're coming up on Christmas season. It's not really a bad thing to have in reserve in case you forget to buy something for your third cousin twice removed. A merch at the-suspendables. Make sure everybody knows that you're someone who does the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right reasons. And we'll be emptying out all the inventory so that Garrett can bring us some brand new merch, hopefully sometime in the new year. All right. And without any further delay, let's get to a discussion about November 2025 retrospective. And I have a list off the side, and I'll try to keep myself on task, but also I've got some accompanying articles and news and videos that'll make this case because I think it's a pretty strong one. And I don't want to just be exercising my opinion on things. I want to bring the facts and the evidence here. I am, after all, an investigator at heart. You have to follow due process. You have to lay out those facts in evidence. And I think we have a lot. So we'll begin. And just also as a heading into it, these aren't necessarily things that happen solely in November, but they definitely carried into November in a healthy portion of it. So I'm going to be expanding that out to meet my case here. So the first one I want to get to is Arctic frost. Arctic frost, and this piece actually comes from Senator Chuck Grassley's website. Headline is new: Jack Smith subpoenaed records for over 400 Republican targets as part of Arctic frost, the Jack Smith special investigator, special prosecutor case against Donald Trump. We learned now that Jack Smith is no longer working at the helm, and Kash Patel at the helm of the FBI has turned over some documents connected to it. This is actually one of them. It's an FD 1057 electronic communication from the file. It's about the opening of this investigation, which was Arctic frost. As you can tell there, if you're watching us here on YouTube or Rumble, opened in April of 2022. Can't help but notice that there are 6 names that are blacked out here. So on top of taking a black eye, when it was revealed by Senator Grassley and others in the Senate when they learned about it, that the Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a wholly legal, constitutional, within policy and procedure and guidance from Attorney General, but inappropriate investigation of a former president and his allies and basically anybody who's ever pulled a lever for a Republican. And yet we're still blocking out 6 names that are on that opening electronic communication because those people still work for the FBI. So despite any sort of argument that it's a new FBI, it's a new day, it still resembles a lot of the old FBI, the one that said, hey, you know what? We're supposed to be vetted as having fidelity to the Constitution, bravery to step up when you think that maybe we might be doing something that's legal but inappropriate. And integrity, well, got to make sure that check clears. Got to make sure that the eagle craps into my bank account every 2 weeks. I'm just following orders. That is, after all, the most important thing. I mean, we were reliably informed about that, not in November, but earlier this year by the FBI director and the co-deputy director, that following orders is extremely important.
But you promoted Stephen Jensen, the architect of the FBI's overzealous January 6th investigation.
I want the American public to realize what we did. That man was in a position where he literally fought back against the machine who was saying, we want to politicize this event. We want to politicize this event. And at the end of the day, remember, Maria, there's a chain of command here. So you can fight back your chain of command to a certain degree before they fire you. And Steve Jensen and other folks were promoted because they embody what the American public demands of FBI agents.
He literally fought back. Did he write it down in literature? No. He fought back, but at the end of the day, he just followed orders, which is what everybody did on Operation Arctic Frost. So that was a reveal towards the end of October, but definitely lots of news was being shared about it in November. And there, I brought that adjoining piece, which wasn't relative to what happened this month, but I do think it's a nice way to pivot over to the second one, which is probably the biggest story of November. It's multiple stories connected to it and pertains to January 6th, which Steve Jensen was the architect of the FBI's response to investigating hundreds, thousands of individuals who went to the Capitol on January 6, 2021 as racially motivated violent extremists because they voted for one white guy over another white guy. And damn the torpedoes. They don't have a First Amendment right to assemble or speak or address their grievances in front of their elected officials. Even if they did commit some sort of a trespass, we found out some things here that might have led us all to conclude that this was nothing but a put-up job. So multiple pieces came from my buddies over at The Blaze, Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker. I want to throw those up in order to make sure that we're memorializing everything that we've learned over the last few weeks into this month of November. So the first one Comes from early October, but it is necessary to know for the big reveal. The video sleuth challenges FBI January 6th pipe bomb narrative, unearths new evidence. That's from Armitage, who's the anonymous video expert who's been reviewing all the closed circuit television and doing it with Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker. And what we learned from this first one is that there were multiple locations for both pipe bombs that the pipe bomber dropped off. They weren't just put behind the Capitol Hill Club for the Republicans or at the DNC for the Democrats. They were actually put originally outside of a dormitory for the Republicans and outside of the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, and then subsequently removed and put to secondary locations they called audibles. And also what we found out from this piece, which was relevant, is that the FBI sought geofence warrants for cell phones in the area because they wanted to identify any individuals that were using a mobile telephone. And we do have closed circuit television that shows that the pipe bomber was on a cell phone and that data was corrupt and unusable. But that wasn't true, because the only data that was corrupt related to law enforcement, which under normal circumstances you would call a clue, but it's only been 5 years, guys. Just wait 6 to 8 more months, and then I'm sure we'll get some answers. Now, the second piece that's connected with January 6th that came out was the use of less than lethal force in a manner that is wholly inappropriate and potentially lethal. And that was important for identifying an individual and also pushing forward a narrative that perhaps the Capitol Police might have been involved in inciting bad behavior on January 6th. So the headline is Capitol Police repeatedly used lethal force on protesters early on January 6th. This one was from November 4th from Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker, and they brought forward a name, Shawnee Kirkhoff. Shawnee Kirkhoff, one of the Capitol Police officers who was there. She's allegedly an expert at using pepper balls, less than lethal munitions, firing on the crowd, and showing the body camera footage, which was reviewed by Armitage and Hanneman and Baker. She's taking headshots, as are multiple others. From the information that was gleaned from this piece, I think 16 different people took direct shots, 9 of them to the head, which would constitute potentially lethal force. And on top of that, just incite people to get really angry. And an expert was interviewed for that piece and said, look, if you want people to riot, start shooting them in the head with pepper balls. And that's a good way to get them agitated. And Shawnee Kirkhoff's name came out, and that was important for the next piece, the next 2 pieces, actually, all in November, all from The Blaze, all from Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker. Headline, former Capitol Police officer, a forensic match for January 6th pipe bomber. So now Shawnee Kirkhoff, 94% match through the gait analysis, looking at her walk. And also we found out things that we kind of knew already, but it's worth reiterating, that not only was Shawnee Kirkhoff a 94% match, but the FBI had a surveillance team looking at a house that was next door to hers because there were some persons of interest. And the FBI had those surveillance assets in the area about a week after the pipe bomb was dropped. So it seems like they were perhaps on track to actually identify the pipe bomber. And then, shocker of all shockers, the surveillance assets were pulled back. And instead of actually making contact with the persons of interest to maybe gleaning more information, finding out if they knew anything about the events on January 5th and January 6th related to the pipe bomb, FBI leadership said, no, go back to your desk and answer tips that came in that said that, you know, my uncle voted for Reagan back in the day. He was probably there. You all should open up a racially motivated violent extremist case on him. And most FBI agents just followed orders Stephen Jensen style. Now, the fourth piece, which now brings it all full circle, this put up job, because we have Capitol Police officer taking headshots. We now know that it is highly probable that that very same Capitol Police officer was the pipe bomber. Well, there's other individuals involved. Well, we knew that kind of because the pipe bomber was on a cell phone, but you never know. The pipe bomber could have just been scrolling through Instagram after all. The new bombshell came out November 18th of this month, just a couple of days ago. Headline from The Blaze. Police walked right past DNC pipe bomb to first look under a bush where bomber sat 17 hours earlier. Now, there is closed circuit television. They were able to match it up. The pipe bomber sat down. This was the first location that the pipe bomb was planted at and then removed from, where this individual, the pipe bomber, who's likely Shawnee Kirkhoff, sat down there for a little over a minute and then wound up planting the pipe bomb and then going back subsequently and removing it. Also from the video, the pipe bomber sits down Indian style, or I guess now we got to be politically correct and say crisscross applesauce. No man sits down that way. So again, another indicator that the pipe bomber was a female. And what we find out from this piece is that there were a couple of units, two-man units deployed once the RNC pipe bomb was discovered. And they send out these units, hey, look for other similar devices. And what this one unit did was immediately respond to the only bush in the area that the pipe bomber put the DNC pipe underneath and then removed. And then when there was nothing there, because it had already been removed, they immediately went to the place that it was put, almost like they knew ahead of time that there was a secondary follow-on location in case the first one fell through. So now we have multiple individuals who were better than the canine bomb-sniffing dogs that were out there. They were superior. Did they go to it like bloodhounds? Apparently better than bloodhounds, because bloodhounds weren't able to locate the pipe bomb. Now we have multiple individuals from the Capitol Police, and this is footage that was in the hands of the FBI, which still has a $500,000 reward out there for information leading to the capture and the conviction of the pipe bomber. And was the FBI appreciative of the work that Armitage and Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker and everybody at the Blaze put out? No, they can't be happy about that, because they have to preserve the narrative, which is why we saw them put out a nice piece, Ryan J. Riley, reliable mouthpiece for the DOJ and the FBI, even though it's run by Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, allegedly these days. You would think Ryan J. Riley, who's a piece of trash and insulted my friend Steve Baker, calling him a David Bowie impersonator rather than journalist when he got arrested inappropriately for being a misdemeanor terrorist by the FBI a year ago. Ryan J. Riley got this, and headline from NBC News: FBI throws cold water on a story suggesting the Capitol Police officer was the January 6th pipe bomber. They want to make sure that everybody is still out there, staying on top of things. Maybe we can find somebody else. Actually, from what I've been able to glean, it seems that the FBI really, really, really wants to clear Shawnee Kirkhoff rather than just find the facts. You know, the whole due process thing where you look into the investigation and present the facts. You don't look for an outcome to begin with. And we're also finding out that not only is Ryan J. Riley out there saying, look, this isn't really what's going on. The FBI director himself is very interested in teasing out, because we're not interested in doing investigations. We just want to say, stay tuned for next week. Make sure you like and share this post on social media, or catch me next time that I'm on Fox News tomorrow night. The FBI director went out there and again tried to pour cold water and make promises. Just wait another 6 to 8 months and you should have some answers then, right?
And we've been working like we have with the deputy director to unearth that. And as it relates to major investigations of public importance like the pipe bomber, again, I say, stay tuned. We reviewed every single investigation of public consequence, reopened them, reevaluated them, because we feel it cannot go untouched. We are not going to let these things lay by and allow the fake news media to run roughshod over us. Our indictments speak powerfully in court. If you don't believe us, just look at the response that the Eastern District of Virginia under Lindsey Halligan did to James Comey, and look at the notes and publication of evidence. That's the type of material we have, but we have to safeguard our prosecutions, because the ultimate accountability is with the verdict in a jury room.
Well, he's speaking to due process there. Look, respect. I share the same opinion. He was asked about revelations on the January 6th pipe bomber, and he immediately talked about James Comey and our indictments. What indictments, sir? You now have a named suspect. Did you take that up? Are you trying to follow the facts so that you can present a case to a grand jury? Or are you just trying to clear her because you've been made to look like a fool by multiple journalists over the last 5 years who didn't have subpoena power or geofence warrants? Maybe because they weren't part of an agency. that already knew who did it. And that's where I'm at. This was a put-up job, verifiably at this point. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not playing the game where let's wait for all the facts to come in. Enough facts have come in. I'm beyond a reasonable doubt that the United States government engaged in basically a Reichstag fire against American citizens 5 years ago in January of 2021. A complete 100% put-up job. You can talk all you want about, maybe it was a training exercise. Really? A training exercise where the person putting down the fake pipe bombs was not an expert on pipe bombs or weapons of mass destruction in any way, shape, or form. She was an expert on shooting pepper balls, and she felt compelled to go out the night before wearing a full makeup, wearing a full disguise. That's not what goes on with a training exercise. If it is a training exercise, you would know it ahead of time, and you wouldn't have put out a $500,000 reward over the last 5 years. So I think we can dismiss that sort of possibility. Was it a lone wolf? Well, no. We saw the pipe bomber, Shawnee Kirkhoff, on the phone. We also saw Capitol Police officers in the minutes after deploying going to the exact places that they knew to go to ahead of time. So we know that it's not an individual. And was it a terrorist? I mean, terrorists generally engage in a violent activity to bring about some sort of political change through fear. Was there a manifesto? Did any of us find out about it? There was no follow-on attacks. Those bloodhound Capitol Police officers found that second pipe bomb. How did they know there wasn't a third? Well, maybe it wasn't motivated by political outcomes, or perhaps it was. Perhaps they got the political outcomes that they wanted, which was a witch hunt against thousands of people, not just on January 6th, but anybody who was right of center that was called in to the FBI's NTOC Center in the days, weeks, and months and years that followed January 6th. Because, my uncle voted for Reagan. You all should investigate him. Do you think that was dismissed? No. That was opened up. An assessment was opened up, which means that an investigation was opened up because an American called to report another American for doing nothing wrong other than voting a way that they disapproved of. Because now the FBI is the arbiter of right think and wrong think. The conspiracy argument holds a lot of water for me. Wasn't a an NSSE, a National Special Security event? Why not? Every time other than this, it's always an NSSE. Did you not want all the resources on hand when you knew there were going to be 6 organized events at the Capitol on January 6th? The president was speaking at the Ellipse. We do it for inaugurations. We do it for July 4th fireworks. We do it for Super Bowls. We do it for shareholder conventions in the Midwest. But you couldn't do it for that. Did you plant a pipe bomb to divert resources away from the Capitol? Did you hope that maybe you could just get the rioters amped up because you shot them in the head with pepper balls, and then they finally pushed forward, and then you got them in a little bit more, and then they reached critical mass and you let them in a little bit more, and finally you got them inside the Capitol, and you weren't going to evacuate the members of Congress at all. No. If that had been for Tarek Johnson being willing to take the blame and take the hit, they would have been in there with their elected officials. At the same time, you were denying National Guard resources until just the right moment, when you would have had January 6th rioters in the Capitol with elected senators and representatives, and then you would have deployed the National Guard, and it would have been a hostage rescue. And then you would have had the insurrection narrative that you've been pushing down our throat for the last 5 years. I'm going to play a little bit of speculation now because it's starting to look like it's more and more likely that that proffer is accurate. Now that's J6. We're 2 issues deep into November. Let's go to another one. We're going to re-rack it because the January 6th pipe bomber is so devastating as a story to the reputation of the FBI. I predicted it tongue-in-cheek, but it actually wound up being true. The FBI pivoted and brought up Epstein because it was less damaging to their credibility. So the old article actually comes from Axios. This was the exclusive that came out in July. The DOJ and FBI concluded that Epstein had no client list and died by suicide. This was the thing they tried to put out over the July 4th weekend during flooding in Texas to a left-leaning source in the hopes that we just all moved on. And then the president went in front of the media and said, well, are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein, even though that's all that my people talked about for the last 4 years? There's still flooding going on in Texas. And you just move on. He killed himself. Why don't you trust me? Just trust me, bro. I've been at this job for 6 to 8 months. You should just move on. But we didn't move on. And actually, there was quite a bit of pressure from elected members of Congress, particularly you had Thomas Massie, who was like the only guy on the Republican side who was pushing it until critical mass was reached from the voting populace, from the people who were on social media, the outcries and saying, hey, you all promised this. You didn't deliver on it. We heard that the Epstein files were on the Attorney General's desk, and then we got nothing. Turn that bleep over to us. And that's when the president licked his finger, put it in the air, and saw where the political winds were going. And he decided that, you know what? Maybe I better back this vote to release the Epstein files, which is exactly what happened. Donald Trump signed the Epstein bill into law. And that was on Thursday. So now there's going to be a turnover in this. And there's not going to be. They're going to say, oh, it's national security. National security. We can't give you that. Or there's ongoing investigations, even though didn't Jeffrey Epstein traffic to himself, right? I remember hearing that somewhere, but I don't know. Now, maybe the FBI director can illuminate me.
There's no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
So the answer is no one
For the information that we have
in the files.
in the case file.
Okay.
There's no credible information.
No credible information. Oh, except there is now, I guess, because the president says release it. I guess we'll have to find out about it. But Epstein was a distraction from January 6th. Neither one of them is very good. And it's all happening in the month of November 2025. Another one. Well, let's start out with a social media post from the co-deputy director of the FBI. Very simple. Happened November 19th. Quote from Dan Bongino: public corruption will not be tolerated. A nice little meme underneath that for those watching here on rumble.com/amradpod and the American Radicals podcast on YouTube. Steve Baker, I put a nice little meme like, what? Huh? Nothing specific, no further information. What could the deputy director, the co-deputy director of the FBI be talking about? Public corruption. Well, maybe it's about this representative. There's a representative from Florida. His name's Corey Mills. We've talked about him before. There was a censure vote afoot. Headline from CBS News: House blocks GOP rep Nancy Mace's censure effort against fellow Republican Corey Mills, because the House was looking to punish Corey Mills, and they didn't wind up doing it because they wanted to originally punish Stacey Plaskett, who's the delegate from the Virgin Islands, the one who accused Garrett O'Boyle, my cohort compadre on hiatus, chasing down some illegal aliens, and me of being treasonous, traitors to the country, and that real gem of a human being. She was talking to Jeffrey Epstein while she was in a congressional hearing, and they wanted to censure her. But instead, a deal was struck, a corrupt deal by public officials, public corruption. A deal was struck so that there was no censure of Stacey Plaskett. In return, the Democrats said, you know, we will not censure Corey Mills. Now, what were they potentially going to be censuring him over? Well, first, I actually have the resolution that Nancy Mace put forward. Here it is. It's not really very specific. It says House resolution censuring Representative Corey Mills of Florida and removing him from the Committee on Armed Services and the Committee on Foreign Affairs. So why would they need to do that? We were reliably informed, back in 2021 during the Afghan withdrawal that this guy was Captain America. But then there were some other stories that came out, and we've covered down on them in this program. It was piecemeal. Steve Baker was actually part of that. Jill Savage as well from The Blaze talked about a lot of the Legion problems that were existing around Corey Mills. He's been provable now that he's engaged in some stolen valor. He's engaged in some domestic abuse matters. And now it appears that he might have been paying for sex while going to Afghanistan. So just not really a good guy. Oh, and how is this related to the FBI? Because when Jill Savage, journalist for The Blaze, was reporting on this, the FBI sent a special agent. Her name was Shady Tally Bradley from the FBI office in Orlando, the resident agency, part of the Tampa office, the Tampa division. She went and contacted a woman and asked her to become a confidential human source so that she could report back to the FBI on Jill Savage, a journalist, which would be a sensitive investigative matter for criminal actions. No criminality. They just wanted to know what she knew about Corey Mills. So Corey Mills colluding with the FBI and Special Agent Shady Tally Bradley. And what's the consequence? Special Agent Tally Bradley is still working in the Orlando resident agency for the FBI. I have my sources. She's still there. Guys, we're still in November. I got some more. Now, Miranda Devine, who's been one of the best people to me as far as the journalists go. She was one of the original reporters of my trials and tribulations as an FBI whistleblower. She broke something. This was piggybacking on, or kind of going mutually at the same time as Tucker Carlson, in relation to the Butler assassination attempt, July 13th, 2024. And the headline is, FBI, Secret Service butchered the Thomas Crooks case and invited conspiracies. We deserve the truth. Now, what winds up happening through this investigation that Miranda did, the official narrative claimed that Thomas Crooks acted alone and without a clear motive, ideology, or digital footprint. At the time, the FBI director, Chris Wray, told Congress that the Bureau had found nothing in Thomas Crooks's online history that pointed to a motive or a political ideology. A week later, Paul Abate, who was the deputy director, told Congress that comments posted on one of Thomas Crooks's social media accounts appeared to reflect anti-Semitic, anti-immigration themes to espouse political violence and are described as extreme in nature. And they were trying to square a circle and say, look, he doesn't have anything going on here. Oh, wait, we found something. He's a racially motivated violent extremist, probably of the conservative side. That was the message they went. What wound up being revealed by Miranda and Tucker Carlson was that, no, actually, this guy was far right and was anti-Semitic and white supremacist in nature and loved Donald Trump. And then after coronavirus, he did a 180-degree flip and he became a rabid, radical leftist Marxist. So there was a lot of content out there that we weren't entitled to. So all the discussions about, well, we don't know. He just kind of just appeared out of nowhere. We don't know what happened at all. Now, if you remember back to July of 2024, after the assassination attempt, when the would-be president, now current president of the United States, got shot in the head. And Christopher Wray said, oh, I don't know if he got shot or not. Yes, he got shot in the head. It was actually a successful assassination attempt. Thomas Crooks got up inside of 150 yards and took a headshot and hit the president. That's successful. He just didn't die. There was all this fallout afterwards. And I've speculated on this, and I'm going to continue to speculate. I think that my case that I made originally is growing stronger and stronger, just like January 6th. And before I give you my speculation, give you a little bit more background. This was Paul Abate, at the time, deputy director of the FBI, talking to the Senate Judiciary Committee about how the FBI intended to investigate Butler. And it was going to be terrorism.
Deputy Director Abate, you said this is an assassination attempt and domestic terrorism. It's obviously assassination attempt. Why make the distinction? What is different about that?
We think it's important to cover all the possibilities here in the reality of what we're dealing with and what we've all seen, Senator. And we've learned lessons from the past.
They learned lessons from the past. The lessons from the past actually were derivative of the Capitol baseball shooting, when Steve Scalise was nearly killed, when there was a Bernie Sanders who showed up at the ball field and asked, where are the Republicans? And then when he found that out, he went out and started shooting up the ball field. And the FBI got brought in because, they're not a political partisan organization. They're totally apolitical. And they said that wasn't an assassination attempt. That was actually suicide by cop. But what Paul Abate winds up spelling out there is that because that really wasn't properly done, they don't want to have the blinders on. They want to be willing to investigate this assassination attempt as potentially being domestic terrorism. Well, Is that a benign and innocent explanation? It is as an explanation, likely not the actual reason. I contended at the time, and I still contend, that Thomas Crooks is tailor-made, perfect profile for an FBI playbook entrapment case for a terrorism case. What is the playbook? If you're new to the American Radicals podcast, it's pretty simple. Find a vulnerable person, someone who's low intelligence, emotionally disturbed, down on their luck, lonely, and then you introduce a confidential human source and eventually an undercover employee, and you groom that individual as long as necessary, particularly if they're a minor. It might take a couple of years for them to become of age at 18 when you can slap the cuffs on. As long as it takes, you convince that person to do their worst ideas possible. And then when they do, you spring the mousetrap and you say, aha, we got you. You're providing material support to terrorism. Or aha, you're about to purchase a weapon of mass destruction. Now, another component of that exact same hearing was a discussion about how Iran might have been involved in the assassination attempt of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. I swear I'm going to bring this all together. And there was another individual that they tried desperately to bring in, and it was this individual whose name was Asif Merchant. Asif Merchant, another victim of the FBI playbook, he was arrested July 12th, 2024, the day before the assassination plot, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because if you interdicted, there wouldn't have actually been an assassination plot. But what did Asif Merchant do? Well, he arrived in the United States with the sponsorship of the FBI. He was admitted into the U.S. via a parole for, quote, significant public benefit. The FBI sponsored that parole. Well, why would they do that? Had they built a case on this guy who came from Iran? He was a Pakistani who was coming through Iran. Did they have actionable intelligence that he was intending on carrying out some sort of attack or providing material support for some attack? No. I mean, because if that happened, when he arrived in Dallas, they would have thrown a flashbang at his feet and arrested him. They didn't do that. Instead, what the FBI did was allow Asif Merchant, who was supposed to be working on behalf of Iran, to travel to New York City, where he met with 2 undercover employees, and then laid out a plan where he was going to recruit hitmen from nightclubs around New York City. And on top of that, he was going to recruit dozens of individuals who were going to have fake protests outside the residences of multiple United States politicians to distract them. And while they were distracted, another woman who he would recruit would sneak into those very same politicians' houses and steal classified material that they had laying around like it was in a Corvette, like they're Joe Biden, on their desks in their offices, in their New York apartments. And then she would slip out and have the classified information that then he would get. And Asif Merchant was going to get all of this done for the low, low price of $5,000 that he didn't have, and he was going to have to ask a cousin in the Middle East to send to him. Asif Merchant is a vulnerable person. He's retarded. The FBI found him, saw he was vulnerable, brought him in so they could get a big pop. And then it just conveniently happened July 12th. And then over the weekend, July 13th, when the FBI undercover or the confidential human source who was grooming Thomas Crooks into some domestic terrorist, racially motivated, violent extremist plot was not working because it was a weekend. And then Thomas Crooks, who was slightly more intelligent than Asif Merchant and most of these targets of FBI entrapment schemes, he said, hey, you know, I really don't like the president or the would-be president, candidate Trump. I'm just going to grab my dad's deer rifle. I'm just going to go off script. I'm not going to follow all the breadcrumbs to this plot. This just seems like a crime of opportunity to me. And he went and he made a successful shot at a successful assassination attempt. And then the FBI said, holy crap. Not only was he on our radar, we had an open terrorist investigation on this guy. How are we going to get out of this one, guys? Oh, I know. We'll just say we'll open it up as terrorism. So that way we'll justify already having the case open because nobody's going to look at the date it was opened. And on top of that, we'll throw out a little bit of shade, muddy the waters and say Iran could be involved. Didn't you look at that press release that we just put out? And hopefully nobody puts 2 and 2 together and sees he was arrested the day before the successful assassination attempt, not the day after. Now it makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? We're still in November, guys. I'm not done yet. Now let's go over to some more salacious stuff, less case related. But in this month, nonetheless, this comes from The Intercept, not a right-wing source. It's talking about the director's jet. Headline is How to Track Kash Patel's Jet. Subheadline, Flight tracking is a powerful tool for government transparency. We'll show you how to do it. Because the writer here, Sam Biddle, wants more than just my buddy Kyle Seraphin to be able to track the abuse of the FBI jet, which was decried by the director before he became the director. But it's been a PR nightmare. Can't deny that. Chris Wray, he used to make the FBI jet fly from Manassas to Reagan to pick him up. And every time it did, it's an incredibly costly flight. And also there's a landing fee attached to that. You land in Reagan, you got to pay the airport. Well, the current director of the FBI, he still makes it take off from Manassas, but he lands it at Andrews Air Force Base. So we don't have to pay the fee for it to land. It's still a very costly flight because he doesn't want to sit in traffic. Doesn't sound very good. Doesn't sound like it's very man of the people, does it? He also said that he wanted the tail number, like it's being laid out there by The Intercept, taken down so the public couldn't actually track where he was flying, even though we own that aircraft. He claims that he's required by law, by Congress, to fly private. No, he's not. It's a policy. Policy can be changed by the FBI director, or maybe you got to go up to DOJ. You could very easily change that policy. It doesn't take an act of Congress. And even if it did take an act of Congress, there's nothing that says the FBI director has to travel, period. You could just exist in Washington, D.C., where allegedly you have a 10-year appointment. I don't know why you claim that you live in Las Vegas when you have a 10-year assignment in Washington, D.C. Now, on top of trying to remove the tracking software from FlightAware, when that was impossible, the director of the FBI fired the assistant director who was in charge of the Critical Incident Response Group. CIRG is now the third person since Kash Patel became the director of the FBI who's now had to take over CIRG because he fired the original guy, and then he replaced him with Brian Driscoll, and Brian Driscoll refused to fire the pilot who was involved with the Mar-a-Lago case. So then Brian Driscoll got fired, and now the current guy just got fired because he said, you can't take the tail number off the internet. So now 3 of them have been fired at the Critical Incident Response Group. No leadership there at all. And he also flew to the Boondoggle Ranch during a government shutdown. So it's not really a good look when people are saying, hey, I'm running out of SNAP benefits and you're going to some billionaire's ranch to go hunting. Well, he pushed back and said he didn't break any rules, but we know that he doesn't matter because he can just change the rules or just not fly. We're not out of November yet, because the very end of October, because this drama about the off the X, we got to distract. We had an announcement, good news plot, or a terrorist plot, but not really. ABC News headline, FBI thwarts potential Halloween weekend terror attack in Michigan. Halloween fell on Friday, October 31st. So first day of November would have been averting an attack that was happening after Halloween, even though it was a Halloween attack. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And what came out from this story effectively wound up being that the FBI director was in such need of a good headline to say, we stopped terrorism, that he preemptively forced this case forward. There were actually ties overseas that individuals within the intelligence community were trying to work angles, trying to say, hey, are there actual nefarious actors overseas? The people here kind of, we have a grasp on them. We're watching them close enough. They're not going to get off the leash, not like Thomas Crooks did on us. So we don't need to take some kinetic action against them right now. And the FBI director said, oh, no, I need a headline. Go ahead and do it. So the entire investigation, as long as it was looked into, is all wasted. There's no way that we're going to be able to tie those guys from Michigan back overseas. So we don't know who those bad actors are, and they're going to be free to engage in some other material support to another subsequent terrorist attack. More salacious stuff here, because we're going to go to some personal relationships that exist. It's looked bad, I guess. I mean, like, I'm not begrudging anybody a romantic partner. I am, after all, married. But headline from Forbes, Kash Patel's girlfriend has an FBI security detail, report says. Came from November 17th. So Kash Patel gave SWAT operators to his girlfriend in Nashville. Not his wife. His wife, even if he was married, wouldn't be entitled to a SWAT detail, security detail, unless he was with her. That would be kind of go hand in hand. But Kash Patel spends his time in Las Vegas and in Washington, D.C., girlfriend's in Nashville, and he is pulling FBI SWAT operators off to go give her protection. I'm going to need you to tell me where the policy or the act of Congress was for justifying that. That's a bad look. And a couple of days ago, we talked about another matter. This is a policy matter, and it sprung to me by the co-deputy director taking to his social media account. And not going to read it all, but I will read the beginning because it is the most relevant portion from Dan Bongino. Quote, I'm sincerely sorry for wasting your time on a weekend with nonsensical media fairy tales, and I do realize the act of addressing this puts even more eyes on it. However, ... And this related to the allegations, at least by the Daily Mail, that there was no background check conducted of Dan Bongino when he became the deputy director of the FBI and now co-deputy director of the FBI. And that wasn't true because ProPublica actually was the originating media source that came out with it. It did not say that they didn't do a background check. The worst you could characterize it wasn't a complete background check by policy, because a complete background check by policy would have included this pesky little thing called a polygraph. And according to ProPublica, headline, FBI Director Kash Patel waived polygraph security screening for Dan Bongino and 2 other senior staff. So apparently we can change policy unless it pertains to the Gulfstream jet that the FBI director really, really, really enjoys flying on. But what other sort of things did we glean from this? If you happen to read the article from ProPublica and then some adjacent connecting pieces from the New York Times, well, we find out that there's a potential that not only Dan Bongino, but 2 others might not have been able to pass a polygraph. Some concerns. I don't know them well enough to know if maybe that was it. Maybe it was a waste of time. Maybe they don't trust the polygraphers inside the FBI to actually give an accurate assessment, which is probably something for concern. There's some throwaway lines in there about having a loyalty test. It might be a control question. It might be a legitimate question, but multiple individuals have reported to media that they've been asked if they've ever said anything bad about Kash Patel when they're being administered a polygraph. So on a lie detector test, which seems wholly inappropriate. And also there was another thing about Kash Patel issuing himself a bureau pistol, even though he hasn't gone to an academy, hasn't passed any sort of pistol qualification to my knowledge. That's all a bad look. But we're not done with November. I got one more, and this one didn't catch as much because it was the last couple of days, and it is a little bit in the weeds, but I do think it's very important because Carrie Pickett reported on it over at the Washington Times. So from her piece there, which emerged 2 days ago, headline, whistleblower, FBI top brass shielded from scrutiny of the Bureau's internal counter-espionage unit. Now, this gets in there pretty in depth. I'm going to read a little bit of it just to get a little bit of a flavor. So members of the FBI Senior Executive Service, SES, those are the people that are no longer on the GS pay scale. They're the top of the line, upper echelon individuals in the FBI. They've at various times conspired to ensure that they are shielded from internal espionage or counterintelligence investigations. So if somebody like a Robert Hansen was committing actual espionage, people in the upper echelons of power, if there's allegations against them, are conspiring to make sure that there's no investigations of them. Now, a whistleblower came forward and said that there was credible information that there was a retired agent who was doing the Joe Biden thing, doing the Donald Trump thing, keeping classified information at his house. But because this guy was a retired SES Senior Executive Service member, people at the FBI said, we're not going to open a counterintelligence investigation. Now, whose call was that? Well, according to the whistleblower, the individual who's made this decision saying we are not going to investigate this person for actively engaging in espionage was an individual who was on the Mar-a-Lago case. Oh, and it gets worse. He was also on another case where James Comey directed him to go and investigate Donald Trump when he was running for president in 2015. Remember how they blacked out all those names on the Arctic Frost electronic communications? All these people are still there. And also on the subject of espionage, I know there's been lawsuits that have put out by the director of the FBI's girlfriend. I think it's up to 3 individuals now who she's dropped defamation lawsuits against. Were there any allegations of espionage against her? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what her role is. I certainly don't want to get sued for $5 million. Not making any sort of allegations. But if these sorts of measures are being gone through by senior executives to ensure that they themselves or their family members are not subjects of any sort of counterintelligence investigation, it would be really bad if anything else like that came out about the FBI director's girlfriend. That was the month of November, and we still have a week and a half to go, folks. 22 days in, I challenge anybody within the sound of my voice on the AMRAD Pod, available on rumble.com/AMRAD Pod and YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, at X American News. I challenge anyone in this audience to come up with a worse month of public relations than the FBI is currently having in the November 2025. All right, that was a healthy portion of the program. And I don't want that to be the only thing we talk about today because it's a Saturday grab bag. We got to throw some stuff out there. I think, though, that it's worth bringing in some corruption matters because there's no reason to ever have public corruption in this country, according to the co-deputy director. So let's talk about some of those matters because we did have a congressional representative indicted recently. So let's say some good news, or I guess it's good news that she got busted, bad news that she was ever elected. This comes from the Department of Justice. South Florida Congresswoman charged with stealing $5 million in FEMA funds and making illegal campaign contributions. This one didn't get nearly as much attention as it should have because this representative comes from my state, the land of milk and honey, Sheila, and she's got a hyphenated last name, and I'm not going to do that because the patriarchy always wins. So Sheila McCormick is who we're going to be speaking about here. She's a Democrat accused of stealing FEMA overpayments that her family healthcare company received through COVID-19 vaccination staffing contract. So FEMA sent over $5 million to Sheila McCormick's firm in order to get people to go out there and do COVID tests. This is how much money our government just shoved out into the system because our government's too big and they don't know how to run a country or how to manage a checkbook. Now, the Florida Division of Emergency Management made a series of overpayments. It was in the millions of dollars. A portion of the money was then funneled to support Sheila McCormick's campaign through candidate contributions. She also did straw contributions from people where people would contribute money and she'd pay them back using this ill-gotten money she got from FEMA. No, McCormick and her accountant also filed some fraudulent tax returns and claimed that her political spending and other personal expenses were business deductions. And they also beefed up her charitable contributions, which she'd never made, so that her tax burden would be lower, even though she had gotten an extra $6 million from one year to the next because she was ripping off FEMA. This woman tried to cheat on her taxes so she didn't have to pay quite as much back to Uncle Sam. So points on respect for not wanting Uncle Sam to get your money, but it was Uncle Sam's money to begin with, so they should probably have had it the entire time. She faces up to 53 years in prison if convicted. Raise your hand if you believe that Miss McCormick will ever see a day in jail. Well, we know that @RealSteveFriend doesn't have hands, so I'm going to say no. Now, that's limited to one congressional representative. Let's go to an entire city, the city of Chicago, because Chicago Public Schools is just as corrupt, if not more corrupt. Reporting from WTTW News, headline, excessive, exorbitant travel spending by CPS employees cited in a new watchdog report. CPS means Chicago Public Schools. Now, they have their own inspector general because it's that large. Chicago is the third largest city in America. They have an inspector general just for the public school system. His name is Philip Wagenknecht. Oh, man, I'm just going to call him the inspector general because that is a funky last name. So he published a new report on the district's travel and overnight spending. I don't know why we have so many teachers and administrators that have to travel. Well, they're going to claim it's for continuing education and going to all these different seminars so they can get better at teaching the kids in Chicago to not be able to read, or maybe think that the most important thing to understanding the function of the United States Constitution is that there's a caliphate in the 8th century. If you don't know what I'm referencing, go back to our Thursday show. Now, this OIG report said that the travel expenses went from $300,000 for the entire school district in 2021 to $8 million in 2024. So they jumped by 25x over the course of 3 years. 2021 is also interesting to me because why were they traveling at all? You all were supposed to be locked down to stay home and stay safe, because Chicago went into 2021 on that one. Now, the investigation from the Inspector General for the Chicago Public Schools began when an elementary school paid $20,000 for a staff trip to Egypt to go see the pyramids, maybe find out about the caliphate. The OIG later found out that 8 schools spent more than $140,000 in funds for trips to Egypt, Finland, Estonia, and South Africa for, as they said, professional development, making themselves better by seeing how all the great schools are in Egypt. According to the report, trips also included tourist activities. Oh, okay. They did go see the pyramids, and they went on camel rides, according to the Inspector General. One school principal booked a $400 per night suite for himself and his wife in Las Vegas. Maybe he was partying with the FBI director. And then 600 employees spent $1.5 million on similar seminars in Las Vegas. Now, the OIG recommended jail. Were there criminal referrals over to the Cook County prosecutor's office? Maybe the state level investigators? Maybe the Federal Bureau of Investigation? That seems like public corruption. It's in the millions of dollars. They went up from $300,000 to $8 million. You would think that that would reach the desk of a federal prosecutor. Maybe the FBI could get involved in that when they're not, worried about changing policies so the director can fly. Well, no, the Inspector General didn't make any sort of criminal referral. From this piece, again, from WTTW News, excessive exorbitant travel spending by CPS employees cited in a new Watchdog report, the Inspector General for the Chicago Public Schools recommended that the schools should, quote, try to keep its educational seminars as close to Chicago as possible. So just eliminate the temptation to go on a camel ride when you're actually supposed to be doing professional development. That's all. And doesn't Illinois feel great? Don't you feel grand if you live in the land of Lincoln? Because if you live in Chicago, or even Illinois in general, you pay a sales tax in Chicago of 10.5%. Your income tax is 5%, just for Illinois. The property taxes for Cook County were over $4 billion last year, and these teachers just spent it flying around the world to Finland and Estonia, working on their professional development when they weren't taking in the sights. Public corruption will not be tolerated in this country unless it's in Chicago and the FBI is too busy trying to do a put-up job against people who voted for one white guy over another white guy and then covering up a fake pipe bomb. Now let's pivot over to a friend of mine, again, Miranda Devine. So she's not only breaking the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination stuff down, but she also did a little bit of digging into the governor of New York. And again, I think this might qualify as some public corruption, but I am, after all, just a hobbyist podcaster. I'll leave it up to you all to decide. The headline from Miranda: Kathy Hochul's colossal $113 million gift to far-left groups shows she's just another defund the police Democrat. Well, Miranda's making this about politics. I think it's about corruption. Let me give you some examples. Now, what the New York Post and Miranda did was they examined over 13,000 grants from New York State. Now, that's money coming from the public coffers, from New York taxpayers, probably from federal taxpayers, if we're going to be honest at this point. So you don't just limit it to people living in New York. It's everybody is going to be on the hook for this one. These are our dollars. And Kathy Hochul took office 2021, has issued 13,000 grants. And what it seems is that over $60 million have been paid out so far, and over $50 million are promised, and they've gone to these particular groups. Now I'll take this down, just look off screen here, and list off some of the examples of these grants that are going out there. Are they feeding the hungry or clothing people or giving them shelter in the harsh winters? Well, a little under $3 million to a group called Make the Road New York, which pushes for the government to defund the police. A little under $5 million for civil legal services to Bronx defenders, which is wanting to abolish ICE and the NYPD. Just under $10 million to the Research Foundation for the State University of New York, SUNY, for its, quote, migrant education outreach program. $10 million so illegal aliens can go to college in New York State. Now, slightly lesser, but I think if anybody got a check for these amounts in the mail, we'd probably take it. $848,000 to Rainbow Access Initiative for LGBTQ_* health services and syringe exchanges for people using dirty needles for people who are 14 years old and older. $400,000 to the Hispanic Federation for Environmental Justice. So we're getting with illegal aliens and the Gaia worshipers, and they wanted to fund ICE. $400,000 to the Farm Training Collective, New York City, for, quote, Black Farmers United of New York State. So in New York City, they're trying to let Black people be farmers. I don't know if they have enough arable land there. Oh, and the last one I'll list off, $6 million to 2 Planned Parenthoods so they can murder as many babies as possible. I think that sounds corrupt. That's taking money from the public coffers and giving it to initiatives which are engaging in activity which is averse, I would say, to the lawful operations of law enforcement. I think Stacey Plaskett might characterize that as treasonous if she was an actual fair operator, but we know she's not. Now, this one isn't from our country, but it is about corruption, and our country is involved because it's Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is facing the biggest corruption scandal of his presidency. Let's go forward on the Saturday grab bag. Now, this is from the Atlantic Council, atlanticcouncil.org, and it involves their, I guess, FBI equivalent. It's called the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, the NABU, because the FBI's prime directive originally was public corruption, and the co-deputy director says that it's not allowed in this country. Maybe we can take some lessons from the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. It exposed a $110 million corruption scheme involving a nuclear company called Energoatom. The investigation uncovered a criminal enterprise run by this guy whose name is Timur Mindich, and he's a close confidant of Zelensky. Investigators found bags of cash and a gold-plated toilet in one of his bathrooms. Maybe Donald Trump did have something to do with Ukraine. Now, the theft took the form of inflated prices, which then shaved back and laundered over to these guys. The money laundering appeared to have been going on since 2022. Said I was going to connect it back to us here, back across the pond in the United States. 2022. What happened in 2022? Oh, that's right. That's when the Russia-Ukraine war started. And that's when we, as a country, decided that we needed to shovel out as much money as possible to ensure that Ukraine, which is more America than America. How much money have we sent to Ukraine since 2022? $180 billion. Zelensky makes sure that he got a couple $100 million kicked back to him and his ilk over there. How much you want to bet that the Wakanda that is Ukraine, which necessitates our elected officials voting on the floor and waving blue and gold flags, which were made in China to say that they're defending democracy and freedom and liberty across the world? How much you want to bet that some of that is getting kicked back to them, like Representative McCormick? Just not from FEMA. It's coming from something like USAID, the State Department, any one of these NGOs. Sure would be nice if we had an anti-corruption unit like the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine that was able to bust $110 million corruption scheme, but the FBI can't be bothered to look at an $8 million corruption scheme in Chicago. All right. Now let's go over to some other stuff outside of corruption, but disturbing nonetheless. Now, who remembers that video of the illegal alien truck driver doing the U-turn that wound up killing a bunch of people that live in my state? If you don't, here's a nice refresher. It's not pleasant.
Video circulating online shows the shocking view from inside a semi as a minivan slams into the trailer and wedges underneath. Troopers say that driver, 28-year-old Harjinder Singh, had just made an illegal U-turn cutting across the Florida Turnpike in Fort Pierce last Tuesday. The move left his big rig blocking all northbound lanes. The minivan had no time to brake. All three people inside from Broward and Miami-Dade counties were killed. Singh is now charged with 3 counts of vehicular homicide. He's being held in the St. Lucie County Jail with an ICE detainer, meaning he'll be deported after his criminal case. Federal records show Singh entered the U.S. illegally through the southern border in 2018. Records also show he got his commercial license in California. Under a law called AB 60, passed in 2013, undocumented immigrants can apply for driver's license, even commercial ones. The state argues it's safer to have everyone licensed, tested, and insured.
Yeah, because California hates America, and the news source there are talking about undocumented immigrants. You mean illegal aliens? Thousands of them have gotten driver's licenses. 17,000 of them, I believe, have gotten CDLs out of California, so they can drive big rig trucks because it's safer somehow. Well, there was a court decision that did not go our way because common sense seems to be an endangered species nowadays. So this comes from PBS, which is very excited to report the following. Court blocks new transportation department rules targeting immigrant commercial drivers. No, it was targeting illegal aliens. Thank you very much, PBS. Now, from this piece, the court is from the District of Columbia. It ruled that the rules the transportation secretary announced can't be enforced right now. The court said the federal government didn't follow proper procedures, like the proper procedures that say that the FBI director has to fly on a private Gulfstream. Now, the Transportation Department didn't follow proper procedures in drafting the rule and failed to, quote, articulate a satisfactory explanation for how the rule would promote safety. Oh, I don't know. Getting people off the road who are illegal aliens, who can't read our language, don't know our rules of the road. I mean, that seems like a pretty simple thing to articulate, but as a leftist, Marxist, communist judge says that was not appropriate. We need more time to think about it. The court said that the defense was the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration says that only 5% of illegal aliens let me restate this. Immigrants hold those licenses account for only 5% of all the commercial driver's licenses. Now, does that involve illegal and legal? I hope, because if 1 in 20 people with a CDL is an illegal alien, we got massive problems. But the pushback was that only 0.2% of all fatal crashes involve an immigrant. Well, is that more than zero? That would seem like we've now articulated a satisfactory explanation for how the rule would promote safety, eliminating 0.2% of the fatal accidents. Pretty articulable, don't you think? In fact, I ran the numbers on it. That would be 80 fatalities, 80 fatal car crashes a year eliminated. If it saves just one life, Judge, why can't we do it? Now, the Transportation Secretary, he did publicly respond to it. They're not going to give up the fight entirely yet. They're not just going to throw up their hands and say, well, I guess some crazy judge in Washington, D.C. has ruled and all the illegal aliens get to drive for EVs because according to California, it's safer that way. Here's his response when he was talking to Laura Ingraham.
Joe Biden let in, 10, 15 million illegals into the country, gave them work permits, work authorization, and these folks went out and they got commercial driver's licenses. And they're on the road. You just showed a lot of the footage. People are dying. And we thought it was appropriate to protect Americans that we should have an emergency rule, not to go through the month-long process. We did that. The court has rolled us back and said, well, we're not quite sure this is an emergency. We want to see more data. And I'm like, Watch the Ingram angle. Watch any show on television, and you see the risk to the American people. And so, again, we're working on the legal strategy right now, but we are not going to take this lying down. We are going to do all we can to protect the American people. Joe Biden.
So I guess that saga will continue on. Just more craziness happening at the court level, which is probably a good place for us to pivot over to some artificial intelligence and the courts, because it's not just bad, horrible, communist, Marxist judges who are ruling purposefully against the interests of the American people. What about artificial intelligence's role here? So here's a complete Saturday grab bag pivot, but I think it's really interesting and something to be aware of, things that slip past you when you're not paying attention. This is a concern if you care about our criminal justice system. The headline comes from NBC News. AI-generated evidence is showing up in court. Judges say they're not ready. Now, there is a adjoining piece that I got. It's actually a video, because apparently a deep fake was presented as actual evidence. It's not a good deep fake, but I mean, I guess I can throw it up there because they thought it was good enough to fool the judge. Here's where it looks like.
Tenants here in Glen Oaks apartment in Unit 297. Today, June 8th, 2023, I do hereby give my witness testimony in support of Ariel and Maridol Mendones, who live in Unit 298 and have been my neighbors for years. They were already here in Glen Oaks before I got here. I have personal knowledge of this matter and am willing to testify in court.
All right, so that's clearly really bad deepfake AI. But it was presented in court and the judge had to just catch it. It was a good thing that the judge did catch it. So a little bit of details on this particular case, and just as a concept that we need to be aware of and need to be thinking through potential resolutions to this. Now, the piece that came from NBC talks about Mendones versus Cushman and Wakefield. It appears one of the first instances in which a suspected deepfake was submitted as purportedly authentic evidence in court. So taking the deepfake and saying, no, this is real, we promise. It doesn't totally look like Henry Cavill with the fake mouth on the Justice League. But prior to the case, courts have actually dealt with the opposite matter. And that is people coming in and saying, that video of me committing the crime, that's a deepfake. So they've been dealing with the opposite, but actually doing the proactive measure of creating a deepfake and presenting it as evidence, which is a lie. Now, the judge tossed the case out. There was an appeal, and the judge actually tossed it out again, and they haven't refiled for another appeal. So when it comes to this Mendones versus Cushman and Wakefield Inc., that case is now no longer being adjudicated through the courts. But it is a concern, and it's not just fake videos, and that one looked bad, but fake audio. How many deepfakes are out there that could convince you that Elon Musk is saying something when he completely didn't? We had the palate cleanse about Siri last show. I mean, that was a real woman. She put enough audio out there that Siri was able to be created. I've been doing the American Radicals podcast now for 274 episodes. There's quite a bit of audio out there of me. Who's to say that audio couldn't be used against me in some, I don't know, lawsuit in which the FBI director's girlfriend sues me for some defamation or something like that. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. What about fake documents? Say, hey, that's my car. Here's the bill. And you go into the county and say, look, that's my vehicle and I'm taking it back. These are all sorts of concerns that we're going to have to challenge and deal with in the days and weeks, months, and years to follow here as artificial intelligence becomes increasingly part of our lives. And it's just something I think it's worth going into here on a Saturday grab bag edition. And as long as we're talking about some Saturday grab bag stuff and artificial intelligence, I do have Elon Musk, who I just earlier alluded to, talking about how artificial intelligence is going to do all the work for us soon. And I don't know, I could maybe see some problems with that.
But AI and humanoid robots will actually eliminate poverty. And Tesla won't be the only one that makes them. I think Tesla will pioneer this, but there will be many other companies that make humanoid robots. But there is only basically one way to make everyone wealthy, and that is AI and robotics.
So artificial intelligence and robots are going to eliminate poverty, according to the richest man in the world. He's bullish on it, but I think that there's some downstream consequences, things that we need to think through. And I don't want to accuse Elon Musk of not doing second and third order thinking. Maybe he's just acknowledging what the reality is here. Maybe he's just really Pollyannish in what artificial intelligence can do. I always thought he was of the opinion that we were going to have to populate Mars because the AI was going to take over Skynet style on this planet. But the Indian Express reports headline, Elon Musk says AI humanoid robots will eliminate poverty and make work optional in the future. That sounds good. We could all just do hobbyist podcasts. Musk predicted that in what he called the long term, roughly 10 to 20 years, most forms of work would no longer be essential. Well, weren't most forms of work considered non-essential? That's how I had to stay home and stay safe. Oh no, that was just a precedent that was set 5 years ago. So it should be really easy for the AI to say that your job that you use to feed your family and pay your mortgage is not essential. Now, I think Elon Musk envisions a world in which all this stuff is done for you, and maybe we have a universal basic income or something, so we're going to eliminate poverty. But I get a little concerned. Here's his quote. My prediction is that work will be optional. It will be like playing sports or video games. The same way you could go to the store and buy vegetables, or you could grow them in your backyard. It's much harder, but some people still do it because they like growing vegetables. That's a problem. Do you think people are going to actually not have to work and then they'll do something productive, like grow vegetables? Or are they going to stay home and watch Netflix? Are they going to read about philosophy or history or learn to play a musical instrument or speak a foreign language? Or are they going to watch the slap games? When in the course of this country's history have we ever done something that enriches our lives through culture or education? We're all going to wind up like Wall-E unless we're willing to do the optional activity and go to work. I think that's a problem. And when people are engaged in activities that are not productive, we happen to see things go bad when we had that precedent-setting event 5 years ago, the one that allowed a congressional representative to pocket $5 million off of FEMA. The COVID stuff, the coronavirus stuff. We saw an increased suicidality because people were lonely. We saw people increased alcoholism. We saw depression issues because people weren't going out, leaving the cave and killing something and bringing it back home. There's actually a value to that. If you make it optional, there will be a downstream negative consequence. You can mark my words on that. All right. That's a dark and dismal way to close this out on a Saturday grab bag, but we covered quite a bit of ground today. And I want to leave you, though, with a little bit more positive palate cleanse in the day. But before we do that, we'll do our biblical worldview, which is Psalm 146, verse 3. Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation. And then that's the best explanation we could have. Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation. The FBI is broken, right? I think we should probably not trust it very much. It's all on board for a J6 put-up job, covering up an assassination attempt of a president. Shouldn't put our trust in judges who say that there's no articulable reason of safety for disallowing illegal aliens to drive on our roads. We shouldn't put our trust in elected officials like Corey Mills, who's a domestic abuser, stolen valor, and apparently likes to go overseas and sleep with prostitutes. Or the McCormicks of the world who stole $5 million from all of us. Or school officials just flying all over the world and enjoying themselves on your dime. Have to put your trust in a higher power, and that higher power probably isn't artificial intelligence. All right. And now to the palate cleanse. I alluded to having the opportunity to take the family on a nice little trip out to SeaWorld yesterday. So it got me in the mood for a palate cleanse involving guys at theme parks and pranking people. We didn't have this happen to us. I think that my little guys probably would have freaked out more than they already did. But here's a guy who's monitoring a tower drop and doing it in a very comical way.
Hold on, ladies. There's a knot in the chain. It looks like I got to fix it. Hold on. Number one thing, I forgot the shoulder straps. Let me grab them real quick. saying there's something wrong with your seatbelts. Put your hands up so I can check them out real quick. Hands up. I gotta look at them. Say hi to all my TikTok fans. Got him. Got him good. I'm so dumb, I forgot to put the shoulder straps on. Hold on.
That guy's got TikTok fans. All right, guys. Appreciate it as always for joining us here on the American Radicals podcast. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, follow, subscribe, do all the things. Tell a friend, try to expand out this hobbyist podcast on rumble.com/amradpod, YouTube, the American Radicals podcast. Hope you all have a great weekend. Back with you on Tuesday, 10:30 Eastern time.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.